Hey everybody, this is Brandon, back with my buddy Bryn here for our episode 3 of A Journey Back to the Yu Yu Hakusho TCG. In today's video, I know we're late, we were going to try to post every week or so, and this next video was kind of something that was hard for us to come up with how we wanted to do it, and that is going to be focused on Gateway. Gateway is probably a lot of where people that are still playing the game are playing up to because of ease of access of cards, power creep. Um, it seems like one of the more accessible ways to play the game still in 2024. Um, but this video needs to happen because this is going to serve as the purpose for all of our future videos, kind of based on anything when we're talking about Gateway format. And that is because we played Gateway quite a bit now, and there was some things for us that we wanted to try to balance out, whether that meant adding some cards, which we did, or removing some cards from the format to try to make the format as fun, um, balanced for as many teams as possible, and kind of have access to the same um, utility cards that maybe certain aspects didn't get until later in the game. So that is kind of going to be the conversation today. So Bryn, I wanted you to kind of walk people through what cards did we decide to add to Gateway that do not exist at Gateway, and why did we add those cards?
Sure. So I'll just talk about why we added cards first of all. You did touch on it a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
balance different things, but I know one of our main conditions for adding a card, because we had some back and forth, you would provide a card, I'd provide a card. One of our conditions was it had to replicate a card that was currently in the format. We didn't want to add anything that would change Gateway as we knew it. We only wanted to add things that would just allow other decks to utilize tools that were already in the format. So a lot of the cards I'm going to talk about, every card I'm going to talk about, has some counterpart that exists in Gateway that I'm able to compare it to. So for the cards we added, we ended up adding only 5 cards, 4 of which came from Betrayal, which is kind of crazy to think about that we skipped 2 sets and added mostly from Betrayal to Gateway. And then 1 came from Exile. So I'll talk about the one from Exile. It's probably the most notable and easiest inclusion that some people might already do. The card Villainous Energy. So Villainous Energy is a villain counterpart to Chroma's Last Stand, just letting you draw 3 cards and discard 2. But if conditions line up between heroes and villains, you get to keep the cards. So easiest one to add in, it's limit 1 per deck. It just helps villains get some card draw that they didn't have. The other 4 from Betrayal, we'll start with Circumvention. Circumvention is a counterpart to Confrontation. It is a card that will detach up to 2 attached cards that are face up in the arena. And then if you happen to have a hero, it'll do something different. Confrontation does the same thing, but you have to have a hero, and the villain side will have an alternate effect. So it's, again, just letting villains have access to cards that are a little more in line with what exists and not relying on just the Dark Angel's presence, which is kind of mediocre. We've also added in Shu. It gives 2,000 attack, but if attached to a hero, it gives plus 3,000 attack. This is pretty similar to Colorful Weapons that Gateway added, where it gave 1,000 but plus 3,000 for a villain. Also added in Demon Energy Scanner. So Demon Energy Scanner is a little bit different than the rest. It's not really a hero-villain counterpart card, but we already had Energy Release. We already have Meditation that exists in the format, and their sole purpose is just a 2-spirit gainer. Demon Energy Scanner is the same thing. The one thing it provides to the format is it's an item. The other 2 are techniques. So there are certain decks that maybe have a little bit more, lean a little heavier into items. Seriashiki comes to mind, that's where I'm using it, where they get the benefit now of having a 2-spirit gainer in that form, whereas a deck like Genkai can still make use of the technique side. Also, not to mention, meditation is just hard to find, so demon energy scanner is a good replacement for it if you can't find them. And then the last one that we added was Spirit Detective Briefcase, also a spirit gainer, and it's a slightly worse version of Sakyo's Lighter, but meant for heroes rather than villains. And it's just another way for them to have access to the same number of spirit gainers as villains. So all of these that we added, with the exception of Demon Energy Scanner, are just hero-villain swaps of each other. And we added it primarily because, one, we could point to the other card they related to, but also this format already had Demonic Tricks, Botan's Healings, which are just hero-villain swap-outs of a healer card, so we didn't feel like we were really breaking the format by just adding more of those.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. I was, I think at first when we talked about adding cards in, I think we were both very cautious of it, not wanting to pick the wrong card and then blow it up. But I think for the purpose of the things we added, I like that we eventually came to this short list, and it all seems to roll without a hitch, at least to this point in our metagame. Um, that might be different if some people were playing some different decks. But even then, I don't think it would be too big of an issue. Um, on top of the adding of cards, though, we did remove a few cards. Um, Funny enough, they're all characters. Um, and the first one that we just banned for us in Gateway format was the Dark One. And that was really just because it's a hard card to obtain. Um, the power level of the Dark One is just not on par with other characters in that format of Gateway at that point. Defense wise, the zero attack and its ability, it just doesn't line up with the power level of the other characters. And he just doesn't feel like he should exist. Outside of the reprint, that was the only time it was really accessible and didn't make sense to have him. So we just quickly rolled out the Dark One. Now, this is probably the one that we'll go back and forth on a little bit of discussion because I think it deserves it. And there was a lot of long fought nights about this card in particular. But I think we made the right choice. And that is Daoshi Raizen's Messenger. Give me some of your thoughts, Bryn, on in general just why the card, I think we felt like it performed very well in Gateway, and maybe why we came to the conclusion that it overperformed, and what were the fears in kind of banning Daoshi, and why we ultimately decided to do it.
Yeah, this one was a tough one because I was actually on the side of letting it exist in the format until it proved it was a problem. You ended up, though, through a lot of our talks, convincing me otherwise to maybe get ahead of it before it was a major problem. But to kind of start touching on the question, you said, like, why was it even up for debate? And the reason it was up for debate is we started to see that in a lineup for a team, you need 3 characters with a team bonus on the lineup, and then you have that 4th utility character, if you want to call it that. And people are always trying to find a good match for their team. But by default, signs started to point towards Daoshi just being a really good filling character. And on its own, that isn't a bad thing. I think Yoko already is that. You see a lot of people that just run Yoko because he's a great card. But a lot of the issues with Daoshi started to come to light as we played more games. So to just kind of break it down, first of all, his stats, we'll start there. His defense and his attack are pretty average for Gateway format. There's nothing that really stands out there, but they're also not bad, which I think would have been one thing to help provide reasons to keep him around. He was still a decently statted character. When you actually look at his attack, though, the ability on it was to just attack any sideline character. So a noticeable reference here would be to Wind Shinobi, but that has restrictions, and it reduces its attack power. He has none of that. So he's already a step above Wind Shinobi in that terms, and there's no other better sideline attacker than him. But he didn't stop there either. He also has an effect that would let you draw cards for your opponent's team leaders. We'll skip the Team Ryzen part. That's not relevant. Team Ryzen as a team didn't exist until 2 sets later. But he would still let you draw cards based off your opponent's lineup. And it's not hard for your opponent to just happen to have one or two team leaders. So it's letting you see more cards than your opponent. It's kind of, in turn, making his attack cheaper costed. He's just replacing those cards before he does it. And when you look at card draw in Yu Yu Hakusho, after you get past Burst of Power, Kurama's Last Stand, and now our newly added villain is Energy, card draw takes a big dip. There just isn't good card draw in the game. And he's a character that everyone can have since turn 1 of the game to just draw cards. No Spirit Energy investment, nothing. And even then, I wasn't sold. He's the best at what he does in all the categories I just stated.
Mm-hmm.
But I still wasn't sold. What really sold me on it was a talk we had. And it's that Yoko as a utility character might be in many decks, but you see him kind of hidden throughout the lineup. Sometimes he's first all the way up through fourth. Sometimes he's the fifth character. So you still feel like you're playing team versus team and there's just a Yoko splashed in.
Mm-hmm.
The way he played, Daoshi shifted himself up to the first character in the lineup. So the games were quickly going to become Daoshi versus Daoshi. And if the things lined up just perfectly, you could almost end a game before match 2 really starts. So at that point, it never felt like you were playing a team versus a team. It was just whose Daoshi deck was better than the other Daoshi deck.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think those are all valid reasons. I will have it be known that I hate and despise Daoshi, and I'm glad he's gone. But everything you said is exactly true. The two things that I think need to be talked about yet, though, still, one is kind of just in general, and two is a little bit more specific. But number one, he's just not a fun card. He's not a fun card to play against. He's not a fun card to feel like you're forced into running. He's not a just card that is just fun to interact with at all in any way. And I think that was the big thing for me, is it just made things just not feel good. And I don't think we were afraid. I think one of the big ones was your Eurotogi deck, who Daoshi really felt good in that deck, and it really pushed it almost beyond where Eurotogi probably is in Gateway. And there was, speaking of what Bryn was talking about earlier, there was a game where he was able to kill and win the game before match 2 ever took place. And that wasn't really something that was probably gonna happen all the time, but it really just felt gross. And there was so many times where I think when we talked about how I felt about him and Uritogi, is that it was a Daoshi deck with the Uritogi team bonus, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how the game was set up to play, but it really didn't feel good. And I know we were worried about, I know the concern is like, okay, you take him away, now does it ruin Team Uritogi? No. But I think it put Uritogi back in line to probably where they more naturally are. And that's okay. The purpose of us adding and removing cards was not to push anything beyond where it should be, and also not break anything beyond repair. And it doesn't do that for Uritogi. But like we said, I was also worried about it just becoming everybody run Daoshi first in every team, in every lineup, because why not? And that just feels not as fun. And I get that Yoko is kind of that character, but for all the reasons you said, it doesn't feel like Daoshi. Um, Now, the second point that I think needs to be kind of brought up is like you were talking, and you touched on it kind of briefly, but it's also going to lead into our third card. Um, and that is just the fact that the card draw that exists in Gateway, like you said, beyond Burst of Power, Karama's Last Stand, or Villainous Energy, you pay for it, right? Kitty Love, 4 Spirit Energy, 2 cards. Abduction, 3 Spirit Energy, 2 cards, but you lose your team bonus. They are cards that have specific niches in where they are going to see play. Um, and they're also, and this is the point I was getting to, something that you have to draw from your deck to play to draw cards. It's not starting out with the game with a floating ability on a character that just start drawing cards as soon as the game starts, right? And I think that is the big one for me is that I was just like, okay, you just start going to town drawing these cards. And there's decks that are going to punish Daoshi regardless of you know him being banned in our format. I get it. In regular Gateway, there is, if you're running the no team symbol, style deck, he's not going to do anything really for you. Um, but you know, the meta game, and between how small of a play group you have with your friends, and based on the meta game of what decks your play group is playing in 2024, for Daoshi to exist in a group of 3 or 4 friends with maybe 1 or 2 decks each, like, it's a small sample, and I think it punishes everybody who doesn't run that Daoshi. You got anything to add on to that?
I mean, you covered a lot of it. It's just where we landed, and this sounds hypocritical. Maybe it is. I don't know. We want to have fun games. We are playing this game because we like the card game, we like the mechanics, we like the show. We want it to be something fun to do. If it wasn't fun, we wouldn't have picked it up again.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we also are trying to win. We are trying to build decks that are balanced with each other, but if we put our best foot forward trying to win, they remain balanced. We don't want anyone to just take it easy to knock down a deck of peg. And Daoshi lets you draw cards. Drawing cards wins games. It's gaining spirit energy and drawing cards are the 2 things that will win you a game every game. So it was just going to start merging together that we ran Daoshi because he drew cards at the start of the game and everyone had access to them.
Yep.
And we could have just said, hey, honor rule, no one run it. We're trying to have fun here. But we knew, again, there is a competitiveness here. We're trying to win. So the best way for us to preserve the fun that we were having, playing team versus team, was to just say it needs to be gone. Because if it's gone, we are now forced to look for alternatives that still let our deck function. And you mentioned Uratogi. I don't want it to sound like Uratogi is the only reason we banned it.
Mm-hmm.
We started seeing this with everyone in our play group and every team. We were all moving towards Daoshi. Uratogi was just the first one that started it. I started it. And it was the first one that pulled off the Daoshi win.
Yep.
But we all saw it. We saw it was possible with all teams. And we just didn't want it anymore. We did not want to run into that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that is the great Daoshi debate that went on for weeks here and got nasty at points, which is fun. I'd look back at it now. I'm like, oh, that was so fun. But I think it kind of leads into our third card, also a character, and follows in the footsteps of Daoshi, but in a lot of ways doesn't. But it seemed like the natural progression. If Daoshi's gone, what would you move to? And this card reared its ugly head. Um, and that is Yusuke Raizen's successor. So give me your thoughts on, that progression and why we came to that conclusion pretty fast.
Yeah, you kicked off the Daoshi one as being the controversial one, and I think you might be, sure it's controversial. I think this is really the controversial one. Yusuke Raizen's successor, we banned without proper testing to see if it would become a problem, but with how our minds were just geared towards, again, draw cards. How do you draw cards? How do you replace Daoshi when he's gone? Yusuke Raizen's successor has an ability that is when, I believe it's when he takes points of damage, you just draw 2 cards, which would be fine. Your opponent can theoretically play around that, kind of. I mean, they have to attack it to win,
Mm-hmm.
but they can try to limit that. But he also has an attack when he goes first that's like 1 for 8,000 or something, which just feels a little outside of Gateway's power ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up just immediately banning this because with our talks saying, all right, Daoshi's gone. Let's go back, let's look at our decks, let's reconstruct them. The very next step was, oh, that's fine. I'm just going to lead with Yusuke. I still get to draw a ton of cards, and I still get to apply pressure on my first match because you have nothing better than a 1 for 8,000 attack.
Yep.
And again, defense is perfectly suitable. It's just like Daoshi's. It's a fine defense stat. He's not going to get preyed upon by anyone who can overwhelmingly kill. So I really do think that this is the one that probably should have been tested, but we just knew we were going right to, well, what's the next unfun card? And it was Yusuke.
Yep.
So we just got to, but no, he's gone too.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think there's really anything more to say about Yusuke other than that. Except for the fact that, you know what? He's one of those cards like Meditation where he's just impossible to find. And if it's not a card that's readily available to people, it kind of felt gross to just have him in there. Um, Unfortunately for me, I'm the only one in our play group who doesn't have him. Um, but yeah, so that is the important video today that needed to happen for us was to kind of get to Gateway here, talk about the changes we made, and we thought about making a video just okay, we'll talk about Gateway first, and then talk about make another video describing the changes we made, and it didn't make sense to do that. I think as we kind of look at who's watching these videos, like it doesn't need to be these explanations for things that we've kind of done in the past, and we're gonna move kind of I think more to a little bit more where we're talking about the game, the gameplay. We want to start moving into showing some decks off that we've made and some gameplay and just do that because I think the original idea we had with this was kind of putting stuff out there for people who there wasn't a lot of content and people might not have when people are looking for how to get into this game there wasn't much of that available to find, and I think that's really not who the audience is for us. I think the audience is for us is the group of people that we know from the Facebook group and all those different things that we come into contact with who know the game, they know the cards, and it should just be kind of a place for us to talk about that stuff. And that's what we're going to try to do moving forward. So this is an important video. Some of the videos coming up, like I said, are going to be kind of deck focused, some gameplay, and just kind of all surrounding Gateway for a little bit as we've taken that step. So I hope you'll tune in for that in the future. And thanks for watching, and give us your thoughts on some of these additions and banning of cards. I'd love to hear some people's reactions to some of those. So until next time, see you later, Bryn.
You're random.